Over the past several months, I've been working on a very large project. I'm attempting to create a video game console that's small and underpowered, but still affordable, with a focus on games rather than graphics. Because my console is going to be so underpowered, I decided that modern game engines like Unity or Godot would just be too heavy and would severely limit developers. So I decided my first step was to create my own hyper-optimized game engine just for the console, Drift Engine. Drift Engine was not only a huge undertaking, but it was also made using C++ and OpenGL, two very complicated tools that I had no prior experience with. Pairing that with one of the largest programming projects you could ever attempt, I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. Progress actually went great for the first few weeks. I was able to get a large amount of the 2D features done relatively quickly, and it seemed like pretty soon I would be able to make full games with it. So I made a decision that would become the first phase of my engine's downfall. I attempted to recreate the first level of Super Mario Bros. It sounds easy on the surface, right? It's a very simple game, and I already had pretty much everything I needed. Except I didn't. The biggest thing I was missing in my engine was the actual tool used to create the game. I wasn't making Mario with my game engine, I was making Mario from scratch and calling it a game engine. This also exposed major flaws in the way that I had programmed things, and I realized a ton of important features were actually still missing. Even programming simple things like a small coin animation was a huge headache. I quickly started to feel burnt out, and the last thing I wanted to do was sit down and stare at Visual Studio for 3 hours while making minimal progress. I didn't even have a clear roadmap for my next steps, simply because I just didn't know what was supposed to come next. I had never made something like this before. I had no instructions. I was just doing what felt right and hoping for the best, which, again, is how I ended up in this situation. What also didn't help was that the whole time I was working on the game engine, I had so many great game ideas that I just really wanted to start working on. And I had the tools, I had the knowledge, I could boot up Unity and start working on one that day. And in case you didn't know, it's not really great when you're working on one thing, but the whole time you just can't wait to move on from that and start working on another thing. So eventually I realized that I just was not making any progress, and I started researching. This research led to me realizing that I had severely underestimated modern game engines. It turns out they could make games for my console perfectly fine, probably even better than Drift Engine ever could. I've also decided that the console is going to probably run on some kind of Android-based operating system, which means that game engines like Unity and Godot can already export their games to this platform, which means that if a developer had made a game in Unity or Godot prior to the console's release, they could really easily port it over if they wanted to. And so, Drift Engine is being archived. I honestly might never touch it again, or maybe I'll come back to it someday, I don't know. But one thing that I do know is that I'm much closer to creating this console than I initially realized. So basically, I've given up. But only good things can come from this. My next step is to just get funding for the console, which is going to be a lot more expensive than I initially thought, but that's more of a future problem. I'm not too worried about that right now. I'm sure I'll figure something out. But for now, I've actually started development for a game that I had an idea for, and I think that the next few videos are going to be devlogs for that game. So stay tuned and subscribe and stuff. Yeah. Okay, that's probably good.